We're live.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Dr. Khan.
Assalamu alaikum from Bakhtiar as well.
Welcome back to our Pashtun channel. What feedback are we getting so far from what we've done?
You're getting the engagement's building slowly and surely. Had some very positive comments. Basically, a couple of people have kind of commented. It's not taken off massively, but the interaction is there. It's slow and sure. It's a slow, sure, steady process.
It's a bit like Man United not taking off, but we have to wait and see how this progresses in the next couple of games. And we'll get to the top. We'll get to the table. Okay, cut the analogy.
Yeah.
Anyway, what do you want to talk about today, back there?
Today, the last topic of conversation that we had, we were talking about the struggles of marriages between basically European countries and Pakistan. Obviously, it was something which was very strong. Our forefathers believed in that very strongly, and they had a way of doing things, and how it impacted those which were actually subject to it and how they dealt with it. So previously we looked at what happened basically when they came over initially in the 60s, 70s. In effect, myself and Dr. Khan, we could be classified as second generation, which actually integrated into the UK, and we built on the roots and foundations that our forefathers built. And marriage was something which is obviously a big part of this, and how we were going to actually hold that up. So the struggles that we had, Dr. Khan, how old were you when you were subject to the marriage process?
I was about 3 years old. We all struggled in the late 80s and early 90s. It was a form of formality, acceptance of what your parents said to you. You accepted blindly because when we were growing up, family meant everything. Okay, the individuality, what you wanted in life and who you wanted was secondary. So we kind of followed the traditional path by which whatever your dad said, you will listen, and that's just the way it happened to all my brothers and to a lot of the people that I know. And I was talking to Bakhtiar off before this. That movie East is East, when the guy who works in the chippy in Manchester introduced his sons to the prospective wives. It was just, you don't even see him, you don't talk to him. It's like, here you go, son. That's your life partner, and job done, box ticked. And to a large extent, all of my brothers, right, at least 5 or 4 of them went through that path where they were told, this is your wife and you have to accept it. And even if it raised a few eyebrows, they just got on with it. But there were struggles within that itself.
That's what I actually wanted to talk about, basically, because obviously we grew up in the 80s, so that was our teenage years were the 80s and the early 90s. And what actually happened at that stage is probably a key consideration, because looking at where society is now and how the community and how people have changed and the mentalities and the way of thinking, it's something which I feel has been brushed under the carpet by a lot of people, in that they look at it blindly and think it was the better way of doing things. Is there an actual correct way of doing things? Because the question that you need to ask yourself really is, was it better to say, this is the person that you are getting married, where you've been married to and it's done, and the person has no say in it? Or is it better to say what you have today and you have a choice? Because
it's a difficult one, I'll be honest with you, because don't forget, some relationships that went through the initial, here's your wife, they've lasted the course of time. They've been with them through hook or by crook, whether there's a language problem or whatever the issues, they're still together after 40 years, 50 years.
That's why when they say you learn to love, is marriage.
But what is love? Love is something. It's not a sexual. It's not about sex. Sex is something else, right? Sex is something that is just common amongst you in relationships. But love is something that you kind of.
That's a subjective thing more than anything else. Love is something that you probably look at later on. It's the compatibility element, is where you have East meets West. You've got second generation, which is in the UK, which was ourselves. Our forefathers had very, very strong ties to Pakistan. They'd lived there, they'd grown up there, they came to the West, they started working. We've obviously already documented the journey of how they got here.
Yeah.
After they got here, they still had their grounding and their foundations was Pakistan. Our grounding and our foundation was England. It's the conflict which actually occurred basically, and the mental conflict and anguish with that generation where we looked at it and it was like your father or your mother and father have collectively decided you will be getting married to this person. If you were lucky, you actually, well, you kind of worked out what her name was, and you may have known some of her family in the sense that if there is an immediate family connection, you'd have had an idea. If there wasn't an immediate family connection, you were looking into a crystal ball and thinking, what is
You know what? If you're lucky, you probably end up with a fit one. If you were unlucky, you would end up with a half decent one. That's just just the way the cookie crumbles, just the way things happen.
I wouldn't actually,
Yeah.
you know, the age that me and you are at now kind of thing and what you learn.
I'm still a young
Yes.
spring chicken, by the way.
Of course you are, but a
We're
mature...
at a marathon.
Yes.
Yes. Smiles.
Yes, you're a mature spring chicken now, as they say. An analogy which we'll use, which obviously some people may not be happy with. You are like a fine wine. You get better with age. So
Yeah, I do taste nice.
yes, okay, but it's the compatibility element is probably where the crux of this actual conversation will
obviously.
go, because the mentality that we had when we grew up, we had a Western education, you had Western schools, you had friends basically which were from different cultures, different backgrounds, and regardless of how much your parents tried to shelter you from that, saying this is what we are, this is our identity, ultimately you spent 6-7 hours a day at school with those which weren't from the Pashtun community.
Yeah.
It was the outside community which molded you. How do you feel that worked basically with your mentality, what your thinking was, and then basically carrying that over into the sphere of marriage?
It's difficult, because for me personally, that's like it really affected who I was and how I behaved. And then obviously to walk into a marriage of convenience, for me, it couldn't work. I rebelled. Not many people can rebel. You know what I mean? Because you expect something else in a marriage. You expect compatibility. You expect that the person you marry, you want to talk. There's some sort of sexual chemistry. There's likability. But you have none of that if you're gonna marry someone, blindly. So a few people rebelled.
Okay, so would you say that your rebellion was like equivalent to another analogy here?
I was the
basically?
first. You know what?
You-
Someone has to put their head above the parapet, right?
Yeah.
And now I'm glad I did, because there was a tidal wave of people following the way I went. They used to say this. I'm telling
Yeah.
you. They say, look at Salamat Zwar, right? Look what he's done. And then I was the first one to do it, and then everyone suddenly thought, if this guy can do it, right? Why can't we?
What?
So that wave of
Why can't we? Okay.
choice.
Choice is key. Obviously, then you move into a different sphere. Basically, are you looking at culture or are you looking at Islam? Because with
It's a
culture,
hard
yes,
one, man. It's a
with
hard one.
culture depicts a certain way of marriages happening, and religion has its way.
A hard one.
Has its way of basically saying how marriages are and the compatibility elements. Myself, I'm not a sheikh. You're a doctor basically, but you're not an Islamic.
I'm
doctor.
Sheikh with Islam.
A grandiose.
You know what it is? Culture was vitally important to our generation, because you still had that link with your parents and your mother and where they came from, and that was why kind of they decided to marry within the family. And you know what? Those marriages that have withstood the course of time. I'll tell you the truth, they have stood the course of time. There've been a lot of issues along the way, but it works to an extent. Islam had nothing to do with it.
I know Islam had nothing to do with it.
Right?
It was cultural compatibility.
I mean, back in the days, who would marry a Pakistani girl?
Very few, basically.
Very few. And Pakistanis wouldn't marry Butad either, right? But in our culture, would if you married a Pakistani girl, what would they say?
They
They need to go like, what's he done? You know what I mean? It puts shame on the family.
that kind of thing.
Right.
I remember, without going into specifics, I remember the first boys probably. It seems to be a different rule for when it comes to boys and girls. Basically, if a boy did certain things, it was a lot more acceptable. When a girl did it, it was seriously frowned on in our community. I remember the first time that happened. It was about 95,
Yeah.
96, 97 times when a Pashtun girl married a
Wow.
non-Pashtun boy, and the community at that stage looked
Weren't
at
ready?
no, it wasn't ready. Subsequent, fast forward basically 20, 25 years, and now you're at the stage where they're saying, so long as he's a Muslim, basically,
Yeah.
marry a Muslim.
It's changed.
So change and progression has happened.
As long as it's not Jimmy Khan.
It's-
No disrespect to Jimmy Khan.
No, it comes down to the same thing basically. Islam, it's just where culture and Islam clash, and culture and Islam have clashed because the way that the older generation looked at it, culture was first, and unfortunately Islam came second.
100%.
And as education has increased basically and understanding has increased, you found that it's now Islam.
It's flipped, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's flipped on
flipped.
its head. Yeah.
But the thing that we struggled with, our generation, when we got married, it wasn't Islam. It was
No.
more
Yeah,
culture.
100%.
Culture was the prevalent one.
Yeah.
So when culture clashed, I'm sure the viewers would be more interested to see or think basically, how did you navigate through that cultural abyss, and how did you navigate through with families, with the way of thinking, mentality?
You know what it was back there? They just got on with it.
Yeah.
That's what they watched Only Fools and Horses, Minder. They just got on with it. You know what I mean? Because even in their minds, they struggled with what they were going through, right? But the head of the family was their father,
Yeah.
so they had no one to go to, and the father would say, "Look, Zria, we know your marriage is falling apart or whatever. Just stay the course of time." And they just did. They weren't brave enough. They were not brave enough to divorce. At that stage in the early 90s,
Yeah.
the shurim of divorce was like, please don't do that, right? You can have your wife stay at home with us. You can play the field. Oh yes, that is something that happens, but please don't divorce a wife. And they just said, okay, Faith.
So that
that just happened, bro.
that basically kind of states that it was a facade.
It was a
It-
facade.
In the simplest terms, it makes it that marriage is a facade, the compatibility element wasn't there, and therefore there was certain, and you've
Got
got
a state of fear.
Yeah.
There was just
there's a lot
they
of
were scared.
the scaremongering is one thing basically, but the other thing basically that you look at is it's a facade. So was life a rehearsal, and do we get a second chance at it, or
We
did
might not get a second chance,
Yeah.
but your kids will get a chance of finding a good spouse. Yeah,
What-
through
would it be the traditional way basically of arranged marriages is where it's at, or is it your child finds their own spouse and then
well, that could be the second TikTok video, not TikTok video, a YouTube video, where what if you give choice to your kids, which is what we're saying, is the first generation didn't have choice
yeah
and they got on with it and they struggled, so many struggles, so much infidelity, right? But then they just, even now, most of them are like 35 years in their marriage, 40 years in their marriage.
but how many of them 35, 40-year marriages can genuinely say that they were actually happy 35, 40 years?
No, probably hardly any. But they got on with it. It was a different type of resilience back there. Okay?
So was that basically, were they looking for stability in the sense that you got on with something because the family structure was stable as a
It was.
result of that, or is it basically being selfless and saying, I'm prepared to commit to this because of the greater good?
You know what? You had a hierarchy within the family. Okay? That hierarchy has now diminished. So much so, where now, if you look fast forward 20, 30 years, the kids are choosing their own spouse. Okay? Whether they get it right or get it wrong. That's up to them. But back in the days, there was that head of the family, there was the wider community that you had to think about,
Yeah.
and where you fit into that.
Yeah, but Mohammed, the bit it's where we fit into that. We understand that the hierarchy of the community, ultimate, basically, the last decision was theirs. That's a given, basically. It was the fallout from that decision, basically, which was mine and your generation. How did we suffer, or what struggles did we have? Because obviously, you touched upon it that there was a lot of infidelity which was going on. There was a lot of non-compatibility which was
Yeah.
going on. How did we deal with them elements, basically? But then also take into account, we're looking at it from the perspective of we're in the West and they came over from the East. How did those partners which came over from the East, how do you think they would have felt?
They came from a position of poverty, so they had no choice. They don't forget they were marrying a guy in the UK who was a playboy who used to go out, who would never stay at home. But the mother in the house will kind of look after the situation, and they suffer themselves. Don't forget their mental well being went through the roof because they were seen as a slave, like commodity, just to kind of raise kids. There was no love in the relationship. There was no love early on in the relationship, and they kind of and a lot of those women suffered a lot.
So who would you say suffered more? Our generation, basically, the boys and girls which were in the West, which got married and were told this is what we're doing, or those which actually came from the East to the West?
They both suffered equally, man. It was a marriage out of convenience, and that's what it was. I think it was there was no kind of a blueprint in how to marry someone. It was something that was just done on a back of a stamp. Like my son's gonna marry someone in Pakistan, my auntie, wherever it is, and that's just the way it was. Mental well-being and all that kind of stuff, no one cared about, right? It wasn't highlighted, and they just got on with it, and I think both suffered. Towards the end in the late 90s, some did separate. Some did separate. The wife has said, "Look, I've had enough. Right, I've been married to you for 30 years. I've had enough." And early 90s, when there was more freedom for the women, the law was on point, and they kind of, left the guy, and that's just the way he went.
That suffering, though, basically, do you think that things could have been done in a better way?
It was hard. How? In what sense?
No, exactly.
Early 90s. What's better in the
No,
90s?
hence the actual conversation, the topic of conversation, because if we're looking for a balanced perspective on this, how could in hindsight, what should have been done different?
You couldn't do anything different. It was the time that we were living in, late 80s, early 90s. That's just the way it goes. It was just, there was no other way that they could have done it. I mean, the guy could have said, "I want to marry someone in the UK," okay?
Yeah.
But he didn't have the balls to kind of stand up to the father and say, "Look, Dad, that's what I want." The father knows best,
Yeah.
and and they ran with that kind of
So
they ran with it. There's no other alternative.
So in effect, we could have been used as pawns.
Yeah, we were.
We were used as. You could say that basically we were used as pawns to cement relationships with Pakistan, and they were used as pawns to cement relationships with the West. So
Don't forget that even that now is crumbling.
That is quite,
okay.
We'll discuss.
That's quite scary now.
We'll discuss that as a later topic, basically, but more relevant to when the time when we were there, where we went through the 90s and basically 90s up late 80s up until the 2000s kind of thing. That period of time, basically, it was an impasse. I feel there was an impasse basically in that views and mentalities were changing and things were moving away from the way that our forefathers did it.
Yeah, the grip was going slowly.
Yes.
Grip was going slowly. And it took us further 15 years for that grip to kind of totally go. Where now, if you look at it, the head of the family will have an input in who their daughter, son marries, but they'll say to the spouse, it's up to you. Okay, the kids have got a choice. In a way, our generation, we sacrificed for our
Yes.
kids to have that choice
The, sa-
in a funny type of way.
the sacrifice was there basically, but
But to us, we didn't see it as a sacrifice. There was no
It was-
way out.
it was no. I more than anything else, I personally saw it as a duty. It was the expected. It was the status quo. So
It was.
if it was the status quo, and that is what is expected to be done, and that's how it should be done.
Yeah.
We followed that basically. Was that basically something which was ingrained in us? Was it tradition? Was it the expectation?
A bit of everything. I mean, look, my dad met my mom 50 years down the line. They're still married, you know. Both passed on, I'm sure. Every generation all have that. But my dad would probably say, if it worked for them, it worked for you,
Yes.
right? And they made the ultimate sacrifice, right? So that's how they saw it. If it worked for them, it worked for you. But what did they realize? What they did not realize is that we were brought up in the West.
Times changed,
Right?
people changed, and
But-
the way things happen changed. That's it's something which
That's the
it's something
difference.
that you want. You know, anybody which is looking at this, you want them to think it's not where things are and how they progressed. In a sense that initially, when it was in Pakistan, how a wedding happened, how the actual union of two families came, when families came to the West, and you had families still which were left in Pakistan. How that worked and how they kept.
Do you
that
know
relationship.
Pakistan have the same problem? Pakistan had the same issues, you know,
Yeah.
right? But look at the Pakistan now. They've gone the same way the Pakistan have. It's just the way it goes, you know, because they went through the similar problems about sacrificing to give, you know, to allow their kids now to the opportunity to marry.
In effect, basically, if you look at marriages and the way things were, I don't know if this is a fair comment or not, and I'm sure you'll come in on this if I'm not, because you're very good at correcting me when I'm wrong. The Pashtun communities, basically, as we are, I would say that we're probably about 10, 15 years behind what the Pakistani community do. So, in effect, we take our lead from them.
100 years behind.
100 years behind? I
Yeah.
wouldn't quite say 100 years, but
We don't use that more. You know, the problem is we are 100 years behind the Pakistani communities, right? Because listen, the Pakistani community, right? I know that just from this,
yeah.
they've got Jumatuna, right? They've got Dugununa. They've got businesses. We haven't got one shop, right? Well, we're talking about shops
Yes.
earlier. We haven't got Jumat.
No.
Well,
Hold on.
we got a
Okay.
shell of a Jumat
Hold on.
that had asbestos.
Okay, I'll give you a correction basically on that.
Huh?
Basically, your dad, he had a shop. What year did he open his shop?
Early 80s.
Early 80s.
The
My-
first.
Okay, his dad had a shop early
The
80s.
first.
My dad had a shop late 80s. So that's debunked. Number two, basically saying
We're talking about nowadays.
okay, but hold on. People have moved on basically. So in relation to
No, what I'm trying to say to you is, Pashtuna, that they weren't business minded. What they did
No.
was they were like for their own. They kept all the money. They kept all the money and holding the money,
and
converted to dollars.
and stuck
sent
it under
the-
a pillow.
Yeah, exactly. Who's that? What's that guy you put on the pillow?
No.
Piglet. What's his
I
name?
can't remember.
He's a horse racer.
Oh, Lester Piggott.
That's the Piglet. But what I'm trying to say to you, because our generation, right, my dad's generation, some of them were businessmen, but others they kept the money. They converted dollars, sent to Pakistan. So, but Pakistan, when they came, automatically businesses were set up. So in that sense, I don't think we're 10 years behind, or 15 or 20. We're probably like 60, 70 years behind in terms of business acumen. But in terms of relationships, right? The problems they were suffering, you know, we were suffering at the same time because we're from the same South Asian community.
Yeah.
So
Okay. So let's tie this one up then, basically, and let's see what the consensus.
let's conclude. So
Yeah.
sacrifice. Okay.
What sacrifice would you say that you made in relation to how making?
I made no sacrifice whatsoever. I was told this is what you're gonna do, right? And it didn't feel comfortable in me. You know what I mean? I rebelled against it, and the harsh reality of the rebellion was the community said, "What the hell are you doing? You're disrespecting your family's honor. You're doing this. You're doing that." You get it? And that affected my relationship with my parents. That kind of with my father for a couple of years. That was a major problem. Okay, because I stood up and said no. Enough is enough. When you look at for me personally, it's just a lot of these issues are personalized. When you see your brothers get married and you see them happy or not happy, you say to yourself, "Am I going to fall in that same path?" I said no. But there are a lot of people who didn't stand up, who had kids in a relationship with their partner, and they just got on with it. You know what I mean? They got on with it, and I respect you, man. Those guys who did get married, I respect you a lot because I know for a fact they were unhappy. Okay, they were unhappy, but they didn't want to make their mom and dad upset, right? Then when kids came along, they kind of thought, okay, the legacy is now justified. They got kids, and they just got on with it. When they went to Umrah, they went to Pakistan with and then they fell in love in a different type of way, and they have a support network with their wife, and they probably say, you meet anyone, and I'll say to you, I didn't fancy my wife at the beginning, right? But he'll say to you, she was with me through thick and thin. Yeah?
Yep. So okay.
You get it? That's how I see that kind of generation. What were you?
With me, basically, it was a different, in the sense that I closed my mind to any external influences in that respect. In that, this is what is expected of me.
Yeah.
This is how I'm expected to be, and
so you're robotic.
I was conformist.
Conformity.
Yes, conformity. So I conformed without. It's not that I didn't want to kind of rebel, but you put the greater good, basically.
Which is your mum and dad, yeah?
Mum and dad,
yeah.
And what you were told.
Yeah.
This is the greater good. This is how you were supposed to do.
And I respect that in so much ways.
That's where I did. And on that note, we'll end this podcast, and we'll be returning to you shortly.
Salaam.